Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the third virtual Pasco lecture. I'm Kristen Kuehnle, the owner and proprietor of the independent bookstore Fine Print Booksellers right here in Dock Square. Today we are interviewing Bruce Coffin about his award-winning series, Detective Byron series, and we're going to be discussing Within Plain Sight, as well as other things. We want to get at some of the secrets as to why he's such a successful writer. And in fact, this just today it was announced. This is in a finalist for the Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance and for the Maine Maine Crime Fiction, right?
The Maine Literary Award for Crime Fiction.
Good thing he's here. So, just for starters, Bruce Coffin, what I'd like to ask you, I've known you, I've talked with you, I've interviewed you, you've been to my store, you're great to
And a lovely
discuss.
store it is.
Thank you.
It's one more reason for me to come down to Kennebunkport.
Thank you.
I love that.
Well, it's great when we have you come, and it's great having you back here at the library. We'd like it to be in person, and maybe not this year, but this works wonderfully.
Yeah, no, this is great.
So what I'd like to start out with, before we talk specifically about Detective Byron, I'd like to talk with you a little bit about becoming a writer. When did you know, or when did you really write your first work that you knew, I'm going to be an author, I'm going to be a writer?
Well, I don't know when my first decent work was. I think, I guess that's all.
It doesn't have to be decent.
Right,
What?
right. I really, honestly, I think, a lot of times when you have a passion for something, we tend to know at an early age what that is, I think.
Yes.
And I don't know how much of that is, I don't know what it is. It's almost like you're foreshadowing, things about yourself, even as you're learning to be
So
who
tell
you are.
me that age.
Yeah.
For you.
And for me, I want to say 12 years old, and I had just finished reading Salem's Lot by Maine's own Stephen King.
Yes.
And my folks had a mild disagreement about whether or not I was old enough to be reading that book. I had heard of Carrie. I hadn't read it. And what really had enthralled me was back then, when Bookland kind of ran the area here, that was one of the big, local chains for bookstores. They used to advertise on regular television. And there was this fall, whatever year that was, there was an ad that came on between the local news and the national news every night at 6:30, and I had to make sure I was right in front of the television to watch it. And it was it was a little hokey. You had the guy in his bathrobe sitting in a wingback chair next to the fireplace, and there was a darkened window over his opposite shoulder, and he's holding the new forthcoming Stephen King book, Salem's Lot, and he's talking in real low tones. And while he's talking about the book, something starts scratching on the outside of the window. And I'm like, okay, I have to read this now. I have to read it. So my dad won the argument, actually, and I got to read the book. And my mother was right. I was way too young. It terrified me. But I immediately was hooked. And from that point forward, I knew that is what I wanted to do with my life. He had managed to take really what's nothing more than an implausible vampire story and recreate it, time-worn vampire story, and place it in Maine, in southern Maine, in a fictional town that felt like a town we all know. And he used real locations and people that felt like people I knew from Maine. He even used like the Custom House Wharf down in Portland. And so he inserted enough reality into it that the story seemed plausible. And I love that. It made it more terrifying. And I couldn't put it down. And for me, that felt like maybe the first real adult fiction I had read. And I said, this is what I want to do. I want to write stories that people can't put down and that they'll think about afterwards and keep them turning the page. And to me, that was it.
So I do have to ask you, based on that story, what was scratching at the window?
I think it was one of the Glick boys. It might have been Danny Glick. And the fact that that's still in my head tells you what an impact that story made.
Okay, so it wasn't a tree branch or
Right,
anything,
no, I don't think it was a tree branch. That's what I was hoping it was, but it wasn't.
So is Stephen King the author who really inspired you to write? He really
is. I get asked a lot if I have a style that I feel like I may have inherited from another writer or whatever, and I know a number of writers that have have admitted they've gone into writing trying to recreate somebody else's style that they love. And for me, I never really attempted to do that. I felt like it's hard enough finding that thing that they call your voice, your own voice, because it's not something you can be taught. You write the way you write, the same way we all speak. You just have a tendency to talk a certain way. And for me, I can only say that I was so enamored with King's storytelling ability, regardless of whether or not you like horror or whatever it is he's written. His storytelling was aces, I thought. Yeah, I mean, he just has such a great way to weave a yarn. So if there's anything that has rubbed off, it's that. I mean, I know I paid attention to that. I don't feel like we have similar styles at all. I mean, I guess that's for somebody else.
No, I haven't read both, yes. No, not whatsoever.
But I feel like, I hope I learned something from his storytelling style.
Interesting. You also, I would say your profession has greatly influenced your writing. You were, for how many years were you a detective sergeant in Portland?
I worked for the police department for 28 years. Yeah. I don't know where the time has gone, and somehow I've been retired for 9. I'm not sure how that happened already. But I will say, to go back to your original question about when I knew I wanted to be a writer, one of the things that really, it decimated me at the time, but not having the experience I hoped I would have at USM with my writing professor. We had a difference of opinion. That's what I tell people. I felt like I was a pretty good writer at that point, and he didn't. And so that really made me chart a different course. And I ended up in law enforcement, which, I never imagined. That certainly wasn't my dream. It was something I think that, we all have a list with my children, right?
So before this professor, you really wanted to still be a writer.
I did. I all through high school, I wrote short stories en masse. And as I tell people, the statute of limitations has run out, so I can admit to you now that I actually was paid by friends who weren't as proficient with the written word to write short stories for them, which they attached their names to. So yeah, I love writing. It was all about, I couldn't get enough of books to read, and I couldn't come up with enough ideas to write. That really carried me all through school, and carried me into college. But that's where it ended.
Was it a writing program? I'm not familiar with.
It was, yeah. I can't even tell you the name of the professor. They all want to know. They all want to know if I've sent autographed copies of my books or whatever. And I have not done that. But it was an advanced creative writing class, and I had a hard time getting anything resembling a decent grade. And for me, that was devastating because I really felt like I'd never had to struggle with that at all in school. That was one of the things I excelled at. Yeah, and I think, I'm sure my writing wasn't anywhere near as good as I imagined it was, but I also know that it wasn't as bad as...
Had you published before?
I had done opinion pieces in the Press Herald and that kind of stuff. I'd actually won a scholarship writing, and I can't tell you what it was now. It was some kind of a patriotic thing I had to write. They had guidelines you were supposed to follow, and I think I got a scholarship out of that. That was one of the ones I got for going to college. And so I had done a fair amount of writing, and I felt like, at least for my age, with my own, what I had at that point was limited experience. Mm-hmm. And I get to now I get the luxury of talking to a lot of college writing classes, high school writing classes, and the one thing I can offer them is that while I still feel like that it would have been nice if things had gone different, because of the way they went. I was forced to go out and have a life. And the one thing that you can't teach somebody that wants to be a writer is experience.
Yes.
You can teach them the nuts and bolts of writing in the English language and all the little nuances and the rules so they can break them. But you can't impart upon them the knowledge that life will offer. And for me, it ended up being a blessing in disguise because, as you say, my career greatly influences what I write. And I couldn't have done that had I not spent 3 decades in law enforcement. So.
Well, it's funny. I was also a member of Mystery Writers of America, and when we'd have our meetings with other authors, they would always talk about they knew nothing about guns, shooting, deaths, homicides. They knew nothing about it, and it would always show up in their writing.
Right.
And they'd want to say, well, what book should I read to understand? And it's like, you just can't. It's really, especially, and a lot of this is police procedural.
Yes.
So
yeah.
that's important, and I think your profession has really enhanced your writing.
What's funny about that is I get a lot. I'm in correspondence either by phone or email or whatever with people, other writers that write in the police procedural genre or mystery genre, and they're always asking questions, procedural questions and stuff of me. And sometimes because I read these other authors, I fall into the trap of thinking they know more than they do about police work because they do a really good job of taking notes and trying to portray it. And then when they get a question from one of them, I'm like, how do you not know that already? You know, I've read your other books. How do you know? But it's from experience.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that other writers have taken advantage of, and actually I just taught a class for him. There's a thing called the Writers Police Academy. And the gentleman that sets it up every year, his name is Lee Laughlin. And he basically, when we're not in the middle of a lockdown, the writers all transport themselves to this as if it was a conference, but it's not. It's an opportunity to drive fast and play with simunitions and shoot at the range.
So can any author sign up for this class?
Yeah.
Oh, that's very interesting. We might want to try and get that information.
You'll learn so much. Actually, I was talking to him. We did a class, I think it was a week or two ago, and he was showing me a picture where I saw the crime scene tape up, and there were woods and people walking around in behind, and I said, geez, I love that. It was his backdrop for the Zoom thing. And I said, geez, I really love that. What did is that one of your things that you worked? And he said, no. He said, that's from the Writers Police Academy. And he said, we actually took the remnants of a slaughtered pig from a butcher shop, and we buried it in the woods a few days in advance of this training. And then we had them go out and try to unearth and find the remains that we had left for them, so they could get the experience of like unearthing a body. And I immediately I was like, that is very cool. That is so cool. Where else would you get experience like that? And then if you go back and write now, there's a whole different thing because you've actually done it.
Yeah.
When you write the book, it's going to be totally different. So, one of the things that I think I'm amazed by, and I didn't realize this would happen. You never know what you don't know until suddenly it dawns on you. As a writer, I imagined, okay, well, I'm writing fiction, so I'm just going to make stuff up. I'll try to follow the rules of real police work, but I'm just going to make it up. And because I didn't know, I didn't realize what I'd be dredging up inside my own past and my own memories to write these scenes. And so a lot of them have gotten really close to, they touch me. A lot of these have touched me as I've been writing them because I'm drawing on experiences that I've had. And some of those become emotional scenes to write. So, and hopefully emotional scenes to read, which is what I think we all hope for. So,
you are, in addition to writing, aren't you an artist?
I am, much to the dismay of those who knew me before I was writing. Again, I painted professionally for over 20 years. That was my. I look at it now and I think that might have been my placeholder for writing.
Now you didn't paint walls.
No. I paint. You're right. Yeah, no, not that kind of painting. No, I did landscapes and portraits, and most of the work at the end was commission pieces. I didn't really have the time to paint my own stuff at that point. I'm actually one of the things I'm most proud of. I've done a lot of paintings that I really loved, but one of the things I'm most proud of actually had a connection to law enforcement. And at the time, I was just on my final year of working for the Joint Terrorism Task Force for the FBI, assigned to the Boston Division, and which meant I had to return to my life as a police detective sergeant. And the FBI was coming up on their 100th anniversary of existence, and people knew that I painted. That was my side business, and so the New England chapter of the FBI Academy, National Academy, reached out to me, and they took me down to New Hampshire for a lunch, and basically what they were doing was wanting to see if I would be willing to do a commission to honor the 100th anniversary of the FBI. So I did a lot of research. I got together with a historian that actually worked down in Quantico, and ultimately what I ended up doing was spending a year painting the Edwin Shanahan portrait, which he was the first agent ever killed in the line of duty. He was killed in the middle of a stakeout in 1925 in Chicago.
Yeah, it was Chicago. I'm from Chicago.
Well,
so it's like, yeah.
And I think, back then, with all the things that were going on in Chicago back at that time, I wonder, because he was on a stakeout with Chicago police, if he was sleeping with the enemy when this was going on. But ultimately, he was gunned down when a car thief returned a vehicle to a parking garage that they had staked out. And but I got to do this portrait, and it's a huge, it's a gray tones, like sepia tone, but gray portrait. And they gave me his original cred photo that had to be repaired because it was torn. So it was just a tiny little bust. And from that, I had to create a body. I had to borrow from my own department. I actually borrowed a Tommy gun, a 1912 Tommy gun. My body became the model for his body. So I spent a lot of time setting up shots with the lighting matching what the photo looked like. The backdrop is a 1924 Model T and the American flag, which, of course, at that time only had 48 stars.
Yes,
so there's a lot of research
Hawaii
that went into
Alaska.
that. And I also had to get permission, literally an act of Congress, I had to get permission to use the federal seal, the Department of Justice seal, which is also painted into the bottom corner of that. And that painting is now hanging in the 7th floor conference room of the Boston field office of the FBI, which is pretty cool.
It's a great story. My mom used to always say, Al Capone ruined Chicago.
Right? He was Chicago.
Yeah.
The mayor. I think he was the mayor of Chicago. So
not just Daley.
Right. But yeah, it's funny how all these little sidelines sort of intersect.
Yeah.
The one common thread being my life as a law enforcement officer. So. But it's cool. I don't really miss painting at this point because I love the writing. I think that was my first love. Yeah. But it allowed me, I think, in short bursts, it allowed me to be able to tell stories on canvas with the limited time I had as a police officer. And now I have time to really delve in and tell stories the right way. So.
What is you have a vision, and you had it on canvas, and now you express it in your series.
Right. Yeah, I think art is art. Yeah. I really don't. I mean, there's varying. It might be music, whatever it is. I think there's varying ways of producing art, but I think it's all very similar. I think we texture, we layer, we look for contrast, we look for emotion. We want to generate emotion out of the reader or the viewer. But I will say that painting for me, at least now, seems easier by comparison. Writing is definitely something you have to insert yourself into for a long time.
A very long time.
Yeah.
I'm wondering with the series, how Detective Byron? How did you come up with that name? The name Byron.
Well, I wanted, when I finally realized who my character was, and I had fleshed him out enough, which actually took 2.5 years writing the Drawer novel to figure out who John Byron was. And I can't even tell you what the initial name was now. That's just gone, which is perfect because I don't want to think about anything else. I wanted a strong Irish name, but I didn't want it to be something that would be perceived as over the top. I mean, I wasn't going to name him McGillicuddy or something like that. I wanted something that was simple, strong, and would leave an impression, and maybe say something about who he was. And so as I was kind of going through my own mental list and looking online and looking at old phone books and whatever, trying to come up with names that I wanted, a friend of mine named John Byron that just sort of popped up, and I'm like, John it's a good, strong name, and simple, and Byron, I go, this is perfect. So he became John Byron. And I think it was just before I signed the contract to get the first book out. It was a 3-book contract. My wife said to me, geez, you're using a friend of ours' name to do this. But I'm like, yeah, well, it's not him. It's a fictional character. I'm just using the name. She said, well, you should probably ask if he's okay with that. And I'm like, I never even thought about that. So then I started thinking about it. I'm like, maybe I should. So we got together at some point, and I said, geez, so I told him the whole story. And I said, so I kind of want to use your name for my main character in this series. And he said, well, geez, I don't know. I said, well, what do you mean you don't know? And he goes, well, I mean, tell me about the guy. I mean, if he's a pedophile or something like that. I go, no, I said, I'm not writing a book about a pedophile. I said, he's a police detective sergeant, and I said he's got a drinking problem, and he's having marital trouble. He's separated from his wife. And John said, oh, I can do that. Yeah, we'll go with that. That's fine. So John Byron was born from that point on. So.
And you said that it was a series of 3, so right from the beginning it had to be a series.
It did. And I tell people I can still remember signing that contract. I was excited, I was elated, and I was terrified. Much the same way you feel when you sign your first mortgage paperwork. You remember seeing how old you were gonna be when you paid it off, and what the actual balloon payments were. I felt the same way because I had just spent 2.5 years writing a bad novel. I'd spent over a year writing what they were about to put out as my first novel. I was halfway through my second novel in the series, and I had no idea what the third novel was going to be about yet. So I really only finished at that point one good book, and I was halfway through what I hoped would be a second good book.
What was the bad novel?
So, that was the drawer novel. It was actually called Death Wish, or Death Watch.
And
Death
did
Watch.
it have John Byron in it?
Hey, he wasn't John Byron yet, I don't think, but it was what the main character was, who John Byron would become. Yeah.
So how did you know it was a bad novel? It was rejected?
No, actually, I never got to that point. I had spent a lot of time with it. I think it was only 72,000 words or so, 75,000 words.
So you were upset with it. You decided.
I knew it probably wasn't quite where I needed to be. I was actually excited that I had finished the novel. I mean, to me, that was Herculean at that point, 2.5 years of your life. Yeah. But I was busy doing other things at the time and really sort of treating my writing as a sideline. And I learned a lot. All the things they tell you that you're not supposed to do that most new writers will do, I did on that drawer novel. And it wasn't until I attended the New England Crime Bake,
Yep.
Which I believe is sort of a cross between, or put on by like Sisters in Crime and Mystery Writers of America. And it was an event that occurred in the same town in Mass every November. And Kate Flora, who became my mentor, had been trying to get me to go down to that for a couple of years. And I finally went down, armed with my 72,000 word manuscript, and I learned a lot in those 3 days. I learned how badly I had messed up. I learned all the mistakes I'd made, and somebody actually illuminating them by listening to what they said other writers do. And but it didn't demoralize me. Really, what ended up happening was I got enthusiastic about it. I mean, I thought, geez, I can do this. I've done it badly. Now I just need to do it well. And so when the conference ended on that Sunday, I drove back to Maine, and I spent 2.5 hours recording into my phone, just verbally, what the synopsis was that was pouring out of me for this next book, which was really. There were elements of the first book I kept that I liked, the overall, I think, theme, but I really expanded on it and went nuts. And that 2.5 hour drive, I ended up doing the synopsis for what would become Among the Shadows. And I got back home, and I said to my wife, we sat down, and I said, this writing is really going to take more energy than I'm putting into it. And if I'm going to do it and give it a shot, I need to do it right. I need to do it full time. And I'm asking for a commitment here because there's no money coming in when you're writing a novel, and she wholeheartedly stood behind me and said, if you're going to do it, do it right. And so I did, and I sat down literally from November of that year until April. I don't think I got out of the chair, and I wrote a 92,000 word manuscript that would become Among the Shadows, and by November, which is the next Crime Bake, I got my agent. And
how'd you get your agent?
I met her at the Crime Bake. I had met her the first year, just an introduction. And I remember hearing a lot of people say, geez, his first thing was, pretty good for a first effort. And I kept hearing that, and it kept bugging me, for a first effort. Yeah.
Okay.
The caveat was the thing I couldn't get past. And so it worked out, and then by February of 2016, we entered into an agreement for a 3-book deal with HarperCollins, and which obviously would go on to a 4th and hopefully a 5th. And we were off and running. And the first novel came out in September of 2016. So 4 years after I had retired from the police department, I was finally a published novelist. So,
which is exciting.
it was very exciting, you know. But wouldn't recommend waiting till you're 52 for anyone thinking about that. But then again, I think it definitely helped my writing for sure, you know.
You said you did a synopsis. Do you do one for each of your books?
I don't. I don't do it the same way every time, which is probably why the Draw novel took 2.5 years with no synopsis. I generally don't want a real tight synopsis. If I'm struggling, I will sit down and take the time to figure out what I'm missing, I think, rather than just writing for no reason. But generally, I don't do that much of it. I want to know what the overarching theme of the story is, what the plot line is. I want to know where it starts, because I want that scene that grabs you and won't let you put it down, which is what I love to read.
Right at the beginning.
You know, we all love to read.
Yeah.
And I want to have a real good idea how I want it to end. I may change my mind on that. I'm a little fickle about things as I go forward, but and I need to know how I get there, what the main thing is in the middle of the book that carries it through. But beyond that, I like to leave it loose, because I find a lot of the good ideas that are worth writing kind of come as I'm writing it. It's like going down a hallway of a house you've never been into, or a hotel you've never been into. You don't know what's around the corner. But as you're going down the hall, all of a sudden things sort of become clear, and you know what's next. And for me, that's what writing is. Until I've written this scene, I don't know what should follow it.
So the title then, are you saying that comes sometime in writing the book, or do you know the title before?
Every book has been different. The first one, Among the Shadows, was actually called, I don't remember what it was called. Oh, The Reaping. It was called The Reaping. And I understand once we signed the contract, they break bad news to you slowly. After we signed the contract, that's when they started talking to me about not liking the title. And it was because they felt it conjured up images of supernatural stuff.
It sounds like a Stephen King book.
Right. And I'm arguing my point, thinking, well, I got to save my title. This is my baby, right? And I said, well, that's not what to reap means. And they go, yeah, we know that, but you know, this is a marketing call. And so we came up with a list. I had a friend of mine. I was in full panic mode, and I reached out to Al Amanda, who's a fellow writer who lives in Maine, who's from New York. And Al, I said, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with this. I've lived with this book for a year or so, and this has been the name, 1.5 years, whatever. This is the name. And he said, don't worry about it. This is what happens. You know, this is the business. He said, sit down and come up with a list of 4 or 5 titles that you like the sounds of. You and your wife, banging them around, see what you come up with. And just send those to your editor and see what happens. But whatever you do, if there's a title you don't like, don't send that. Because I can tell you from experience, that's the one they'll pick. And so Among the Shadows, we both really loved as the favorite. And as I'm sending this list of 5, I thought, I can't do this. I can't put it at the top. It's like subliminal. They'll avoid it. So I hit it down at number 4. I thought that'll make it seem whatever. And when he got back to me and said, geez, we had a meeting. We always have a meeting. We really loved Among the Shadows. And I'm silently inside doing cartwheels, but I'm thinking, oh, well, that's nice. I said, that's nice. So yeah, I got what I wanted. And Beyond the Truth was a little bit more work. Actually, Beyond the Truth they liked. I didn't have to change that at all.
Okay.
The second one was a chore. The second one, Beneath the Depths, I could never decide on the title. I didn't like either title. I had written it as Beneath the Surface or From the Depths. And they didn't like From, and they didn't like Surface. Or they didn't like however it worked. And I'm sitting here trying to find it. It's the one that's not in the pile. It's checked out. And so they ended up taking a piece of each one of those titles and combined it. So it became Beneath the Depths. And I thought, geez, I don't really know what that means. Like, and they said, it doesn't matter. It sounds awesome. It goes with the other one, and it'll go.
It goes because it's beyond, beneath,
right.
Within.
Yeah.
Yes.
And now I'm working on Under the Gun. Is the tentative title of number 5.
Okay.
So I'm still I'm using up all my prepositions to get where I need to go.
No, that's interesting because it's you, and people know just by the title almost that it's a Bruce Coffin.
Right. Hopefully, I don't run out of those.
Let me just see.
I've got more John Byron adventures to tell. So.
Oh, good. Do you have any standalones coming up?
I don't. I have been working on standalones. I actually have. I'm sad to say. I think I've got 5 really decent ideas started. They're all in
for a standalone or for Byron?
Standalone.
Okay.
Yeah, they're
okay.
they're all between like 8,000 and 10,000, so they're very early into the work. And I don't know if it's the pandemic, the world in general, or maybe I'm not there yet, where I'm not ready to give a break to the Byron characters. I've told somebody as I'm sitting there, it's almost like I just can't focus on a plot that's not a Byron plot right now. I'm not ready to do a standalone.
Yeah.
I feel like the characters are all standing on the other side of the room watching me, passing judgment. Like, why are you not writing about us? You know? So yeah, I think I'll be able to do that when I'm ready. And it's constantly running in the back of my head, these stories. But I don't think I'm there yet.
Okay, one thing that happens all the time in my store, people will come in, I need the first. Right. You have to read these in order. How do you get somebody to pick up the 4th and just start with the 4th and then go back and read the rest?
I have done that, and I think for me, I would have been nervous about that before I started writing the series, but I'm so cognizant of the fact that a lot of people don't read the series in order because you may not discover the writer on the first book.
Correct. But people will, anytime I say, well, it's a series.
Right.
Oh, do you have the first one? It's like, no, we don't have the first one right now.
Right, exactly. Well, that's another issue. So Paul Doran, another local Maine author, Paul's a good friend, and I discovered Paul from another friend that loaned me a book of his, and I want to say it was the 4th Mike Bowditch mystery. Mm-hmm. And I fell in love with it. And I thought, okay, well...
What was it?
I can't remember what the 4th one was.
I'm trying to...
It started with The Poacher's Son and then went
The Poacher's
from
Trespassers.
There. Yeah. So I didn't read The Poacher's Son, I don't think, till like the 2nd or 3rd installment for me. And what I learned about that is, because that's kind of how I do it, that as I'm writing the book, I need to put enough nuggets of information in there to whet your appetite as a reader, to want to go back and find out what else happened, but not give things away. You have to be careful not to give anything away. So it's great to reference other mystery, other murders that Byron was investigating, or other personal things that might have been going on with the characters. But I have to be very careful how I craft that. And because like I say, I know a lot of people do read them out of order, so. And now because my fear is...
So I can quote you.
Oh, sure, absolutely. My fear, I have written them intentionally with character arcs, so their lives change. I don't want anything static in the series. I feel like that's not realistic. That's just not life. I want them to age. I want them to have issues. Some people might not make it into the next book, kind of thing. But I find it doesn't really matter, because if George Lucas can get away with making Star Wars 4, 5, and 6, and then come out with 1, 2, and 3, I can do this with the Byron series. So it's just prequel. You'll be reading a prequel if you read it out of order. So I can live with that. As long as you read it, that's the key.
Absolutely right. So you said you're working on the 5th? I
am.
How's that going?
It's been rough.
And what's the title of it again?
Under the Gun.
Under the Gun.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's been rough. Not the writing. I've written some great chapters that may never enter into this final book. My problem has been that I keep changing what I feel like the plot line should be for the book, and I'm asking more from myself, I think, because what I feel like happens as you get further into the series is there are places you can't go, like the corridor is narrowing on me, and I don't want to write scenes that feel anything like scenes I've already written. Okay. So subject matter. Too similar an idea, all those things make me shy away. So I've actually written half of the 5th book. Like I'm into the, I don't know what it is, 50,000, 52,000 word mark, and then I realized I didn't like where the plot was going. It felt there were similarities to some of the other books. So I have come up with an entirely new plot line, which of course means entirely rewriting what I've already done. Some of it I won't be able to use, some I can use. But I feel like I've finally settled on what the actual plot will be. And this one will involve this takes John Byron back where he went to St. Joseph's College, and he actually went on scholarship. A little backstory that the readers might not know. Went on scholarship that was paid for by the Police Benevolent Association and the Superior Officers Association from Portland after his dad died. And so it was another thing really that drove him toward law enforcement. And one of his professors he really took a shine to when he was in college. And that professor contacts John out of the blue. And he has since found fame. And he's attached himself to the Innocence Project. He has written 2 novels, both New York Times bestsellers, and they were his work in reversing wrongful convictions. So he contacts John out of the blue. The next day he ends up dead. They find him dead. And it'll turn out that he was working on an old Portland conviction. So John's going to be forced to delve into that to solve this murder, which will not necessarily endear him to anyone that worked on that first case. So there's a lot to unpack in this particular book.
It sounds very interesting.
I've got an old friend of mine who's a Superior Court judge in Maine, making sure that I don't get tangled up in the weeds as I get to the legal process here. So this should be fun. It should be a fun read.
So you don't necessarily know the end, or you do know the end, but it could change.
Right. It's cloudy.
Okay.
Much like my vision before my cataract surgery.
Isn't it amazing?
Right, it is amazing. And but yeah, this one here, there's a lot of different ways I can go, and I've got those running in my head, and I haven't settled yet on exactly what direction I will go in, but I know what all the conflict will be, and I'm happy with the way this is coming out. The good news is I've spent so much time at the beginning of this book redoing it over and over again that there'll be very little copy editing needed on the first half of the book. That I'm sure of. So, but yeah, I think the readers will be happy with this. Don't hold me to a deadline. I'm apparently not capable of that anymore. So, but we'll see what happens. And the other thing is, I wouldn't want to come out with a book right now anyway until I want to see the world a little more normal. I know the lockdown's been hard on everybody.
Oh, it must be brutal for publishing a book right now.
It is. I mean, you know that the launch can't be the same.
No.
I don't know about you, but I'm tiring of a lot of virtual events. I miss personal interaction. I mean, it's funny coming from a guy who sits in a room by himself with his imaginary friends writing about them every day to miss person interaction. But writing a book is like cutting an album.
Yeah.
If you spend a year, if the Beatles spent a year making Abbey Road, they want to go out on tour and let people see it and interact with fans. If you write a book and nobody comes, you know what I mean? Did it happen? It's sort of weird.
The printing is being held up.
It is, a lot of them.
And so it's like sometimes people call and I'll say, well, I know it was scheduled, it's supposed to be published today, but it's not going to be published, really printed until later.
Right, and yeah, they've held back on things.
Yeah.
I know, and financially everybody's taken a hit in this, and the publishing industry is really no different in that regard. The printing industry is not any different in that regard. So everybody's trying to do more with less. Mm-hmm. So definitely not a time I'd want to release a new book anyway. I mean, I feel like I was lucky enough that I got out with book 4. We got out in front of it by a month before things started to shut down. So I actually did get the book launched. So in that, I'm blessed. But I had 50 events planned out, and I think we managed to do 4 of them before the world shut down. But so I'm at least lucky I did it before the thing started. But that it's just sort of had the rug pull out from under you. It doesn't feel like it actually happened, like it didn't finish. So I'm incredibly lucky that people have been reading it, which makes me very happy. It's been getting great reviews. So actually, I think it's the highest rated of the 4 books. So.
Yeah.
Which means I'm doing something right. Mm-hmm. Now my big fear is falling off of that thing I'm making for myself. But it's great. I think one of the nice things about the lockdown is that people have been forced to sort of re-look at their lives, and I know a lot of people have pulled in the reins and sat down and read books that weren't doing it.
Yeah,
so
very
that's nice.
Yes.
And if we're offering them, I say me and my fellow authors are offering them a chance to escape from the horrors of reality, then that's a good thing.
You can be somewhere else entirely, yes.
Which is why we all read.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good thing. People still need that. So.
Well, what advice would you give an aspiring author, writer?
Don't quit your day job. I mean, I say that tongue in cheek, but you know, the reality is this is not a business you go into if you hope to be able to make a living. You know, at one point, I still hope to be able to do that. I think it's building a following like anything you do. But that's not the reason. For me, I couldn't see myself, now that I've finally achieved what I wanted to do, which was become a writer. I can't imagine myself doing anything else. I get cranky if I don't get time for each day to spend time writing. I have to do that. That's just now in my DNA.
Do you have a certain place where you write?
I'm kind of all over the place in that. I have my favorite spots. Before the lockdown, my favorite spots was every library within driving distance. And you can even the Kennebunk Library. I've never written in this one, but now I'm dying to.
Oh, it's a great place.
But there's so much character, and you're surrounded by books and stories and people that have a love of reading. It's hard not to be enthusiastic about writing at a library. And for me, it was a great escape because I could get away from all the distractions at home.
That's right.
You know, there's
That's
no chores at the
thinking.
library. They
Yeah.
don't make me clean up after myself. And so there's nothing else to do but read and research or write. You know, that's the primary thing. Not having that now, I've had to find little nooks and crannies in my house. I've actually now got myself a nice writing studio, but often I'll find myself writing down near the fireplace again because that wingback chair is, you know, it's the thing you have to have.
That's
you know?
You definitely need a good chair for sitting.
Absolutely. And that's where the coffee is in the morning, so that works out well.
Do you find that you also have to read while you're writing?
I do. Sometimes I don't, but most of the time I think I do, and it's because there's a million different things that I will use when I get what I consider tiny little bits of writer's block, which really are no more than you don't know where you're going. And if that happens, I'll go to my faves or whatever I happen to currently be reading and just pick it up and start reading. And what it does is it pulls me out of my own story, and it gives me somebody else's voice to listen to. And then all of a sudden, as I'm supposed to be concentrating on what I'm reading, my own book sort of filters back in. And now I come up with ways to, this is what I'm going to do. So, and I know when I've read 2 pages and I don't remember what I just read, it's time to get back on my own writing. So that, for whatever reason, that's one of the little games that I'll play.
Is actually reading?
It does, yeah,
So, yeah.
reading somebody else's stuff, especially if it's far different than my own.
Yeah.
It does something, I don't know what it is, so. And, or I can read one of my go-to favorites. One of my still all-time favorite mystery writers is James Lee Burke. And his writing has such a poetic quality to it that always invigorates me to dig deeper and try harder. And he really does a beautiful job. So if I'm struggling, a little James Lee Burke will help. So.
I've asked you a lot of questions. Is there anything I've forgotten or anything you'd like to answer, ask and then answer?
You know, I don't really know. I think I feel like you've covered a lot of material here. This is good. This is definitely good. Yeah, I will say, just because we had touched on it briefly, but I will say that there's definitely has been a struggle writing through this. It's such a different time. And I'm sure every writer has had to go through that through the ages. But for me, this has been a tough one. And I know for a lot of other writers it is. I will just say, for anyone wanting to get into this business, your love of writing has to trump everything else. It's not about money. It's not about fame. It's about having somebody other than mom and dad read your work. It's about being able to tell stories that people want to read. And it's about the same way you feel when you can't wait for the next book from an author that you love to read to come out. Being able to be on the other side of that coin there's nothing like it, you know.
But how about handling criticism and editing?
You know, you have to you really have to have a thick skin to do this business. And that's just another one of those things we all have to learn. Kate Flora gave me a lot of advice to tell me what I was going to be facing, but until you face it, it's not the same. I wasn't as good at taking criticism when I first started doing this because you know, like I say, you spend 2.5 years with a book or a year with a book, you're invested in it, and
Yes.
it's your baby. It would be like somebody making fun of your kid. You know, you'd be defensive about it. But I've learned that there's so many people that help you along the way. Other writers sometimes, beta readers, your editor, your copy editor, everybody that touches a book, and there are many, their job is to make it a better book. And sometimes because you have put so much into it, you're too close to see it.
Exactly.
You can
right.
see the details,
Yes.
but you're missing the big picture. And I have yet to get advice from anyone in publishing that made my book worse. I just haven't run into that. Everybody tries to make it
Oh,
better.
who does the covers?
The covers are done by a gentleman by the name of Guido Carati. And Guido is a
Great name.
New Yorker. I know, that's what I said. He's a great name. It's not his nickname. That's his real name. And Guido's never been to Maine. We have a standing date that he's got to get up here, and we got to go to the Old Port. But he's done some remarkable covers.
Okay.
The fourth one is actually, they kind of went away from the silhouette thing that they'd been doing.
I must show this again.
And they used actually a photograph by a local photographer.
Oh, okay.
whose name escapes me at the moment, but yeah, they paid for permission to use that as the basis for the cover, and I fell in love with it. I just thought, geez, that's it's a departure, but it isn't. You know, it still captures the feel of Portland. And I thought
It
that was
does.
kinda
It
cool.
really does. Well, I think I just about asked you. I can't think of anything else I can ask you. It's been great interviewing you again.
Likewise, great to see
Seeing
you.
you again.
Great to see anybody. This has been awesome.
I know virtual events are
Right.
overrated right now.
Right? Yeah.
But thank you again.
My pleasure.
Hope to see you soon. Have you for a book signing.
Yes,
In
absolutely.
my store, and definitely come and pick up if you haven't gotten any of the series yet. Do come and read them. Remember, you don't have to read them all in the right order.
That's right. And get down to the bookstore in Kennebunkport. You got to see it.
Thank you. Oh, yeah.